What's that one game that you always find yourself coming back to? Maybe it's a game from your childhood that you've played countless times, a game that you know like the back of your hand and play for that sense of familiarity it brings. Maybe it's a game you can become fully immersed in, a game that essentially acts as an escape from reality. It's something you can just switch your brain off and get lost in. It's that game you fire up at midnight when you want some alone time. It's that game that gets you through those rough patches in life, and most importantly of all, it's the game you play for comfort. How's it going, everyone, and welcome to the Loading Zone. The very first episode of the Loading Zone, in fact. This is going to be a podcast series that I hope to continue making on the channel. On here, I'll be talking about all things Nintendo, all things gaming, basically whatever's on my mind, in just a purely unscripted way, so I can just talk to you guys. And that's what's going to happen today, so as you may have gauged from the title, from the intro, today's topic is comfort games. So let's just get right into it. So probably the first thing that comes to mind when you think of comfort games is things like Animal Crossing, things like Stardew Valley, those relaxing farming simulator type of games. And personally, yeah, I've spent a lot of time in Animal Crossing. Across the series, hundreds of hours at least. Games like these are really designed to be comfort games by nature, and it's easy to see why, because you're essentially living a completely different life, and in this separate world that these games take you to, there's no pressure, there's no deadlines, you don't have to stress, you can just chill. Like on Animal Crossing, you can just relax on your island, you can talk to your residents, and just have a good time. The beauty of Animal Crossing, I suppose, became particularly apparent upon the release of New Horizons, because that game came out at the peak of lockdown. I think it was March 2020, sometime around then. But really, at that point, everyone was stressed out, everyone was quarantined, everyone needed a break from the harshness of reality, really, to put it bluntly. And Animal Crossing was the perfect escape from all of that. So yeah, stereotypically, that's the type of image that springs to mind when you think of comfort games, but personally I'd say there's two main games that really stand out above the rest as comfort games for me. Granted, I do consider them comfort games for different reasons to Animal Crossing, but we'll get to that pretty shortly. So the first game would be The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. Now, this is a game from my childhood that I've played so many times, whether it's just vanilla Ocarina of Time, whether I'm playing on the Master Quest or playing a randomizer. I've just had so many playthroughs of it, and because of that, I know the game pretty much inside out. Like, I know how to do every dungeon, I know every puzzle, I know where every item is. And because of that, when I'm playing it, I don't really have to pay attention. It all just flows. And that's really a key characteristic of a comfort game. It needs to be something that isn't too demanding. And on top of that, there's just a couple of locations in Ocarina of Time that are just so calming to me, you know, so relaxing. There's two main examples that spring to mind, and I consider them to be so calming for almost completely different reasons. So the first location is Kakariko Village. Between the fact that the time just stands still, the day-night cycle stops, and the super chill music, it just feels like a place where you can pause, a place where you can breathe, because in a Zelda game you're always doing a lot of adventuring, a lot of combat, a lot of puzzle solving, so Kakariko Village is just a nice break from all of that. And with all the NPCs just milling about, you know, the stupid carpenters, Anju, I think her name is, with the cuckoos, the windmill guy. There's just loads of people you can talk to, and because of that, it feels alive, and it feels like a really tight-knit, close community. It's nice. And on the other end of the spectrum is Hyrule Field, which differs quite a bit to Kakariko Village, because whereas Kakariko was an enclosed small space, Hyrule Village is quite the opposite. It is huge, it is expansive, there is so much to do there. And I know by today's standards, Ocarina of Time Hyrule Field is pretty tiny when you compare it to, say, the map of Breath of the Wild, but back then when I played it as a kid, it felt expansive, it felt massive, and because of that, I felt really immersed. And again, the music has such a huge part in this, because the Hyrule Field music, it just has this sense of adventure, this sense of exploration, and nothing quite beats the feeling when you're riding through the field on Epona and the sun is setting. It's honestly just a beautiful thing to soak in. I don't know if this is my nostalgia goggles talking or whatever, but it's just the way I feel about it. I think it helps that you start off the game as a child, so it really emphasizes the scale of the adventure you're about to embark on, because you start off in, again, much like Kakariko Village, a very contained area in Kokiri Forest, sort of just like a small playground to get used to the controls of the game. And then once you beat the first dungeon, you're just thrust into this massive open area, and experiencing that for the first time is so cool. Now I know I said there were 2 places, but I have just thought of a third one, and I feel like in a video where I'm talking about peaceful areas in Ocarina of Time, it would be pretty much criminal not to mention this one. And that is Zora's Domain. The whole place just has this really serene feel to it. I don't know, it's just something about the colours, the aqua of the water, the muted greys of the walls. It creates this really nice atmosphere, and I know despite being someone who isn't really musically inclined, I've been talking about music a lot in this video, but Zora's Domain's music is so nice. It just puts you at ease, it's like a little lullaby almost. What surprised me is that in spite of Breath of the Wild being such a different game to Ocarina of Time, the Zora's Domain in that game still managed to preserve what made the Ocarina of Time Zora's Domain so great. It has that same relaxing serenity that Oots 1 does. Yeah, that's just really cool to me. Now the second game that I'd really consider to be a comfort game for me is quite an oddball, quite an interesting pick, not one that everyone would see coming, because it is a controversial game to say the very least, but I would have to go with Star Fox Adventures. It's much like Ocarina of Time in the sense that I've played through it several times. Some of those times were as a kid, some of them were as my current self all grown up, and I just feel like no game quite has the same vibe as Star Fox Adventures, and it's hard to explain, so I'll do my best to get it across to you guys. I make no promises, but to me what it is the combination of the music and the environments. If you have not seen Star Fox Adventures, let me tell you, it is a gorgeous game, especially by GameCube standards. Like, you gotta consider that this game was made in 2002 and it looked so good. Yeah, so you marry those visuals up with the music, and it just creates this really, magical, whimsical kind of atmosphere. Specifically in ThornTail Hollow, so that's essentially the hub of the game. There isn't a hub world as such, but ThornTail Hollow is the closest thing. It's a place you return to at several points during the game. It's the place where the main shop of the game is, and it acts as a passageway through which you can get to a number of other different locations. And just something about that place is just, in a word, immersive is what I'd say. There's a lot that goes into this. One of the biggest things is probably the day and night cycle, because, well, this was one of probably the earliest games to implement this, and as that happens, the music also changes as well. So during the day, the music is quite energetic, it's quite uplifting, and then when you hit the night time, it changes, and it's a lot slower paced, a lot more relaxing, and in a way, it just feels reflective. It's like you're looking back on everything you've accomplished in that hard day's work and just taking a moment, basically. And it's not just ThornTail Hollow that evokes this sense of immersion either. There's Cape Claw, there's Moon Mountain Pass, there's Snowhorn Wastes. All of these areas feel distinct, they all feel unique, but because you can sort of just traverse between them completely seamlessly, no loading screens or anything, it just feels like one big expansive world. And even though story-wise the game directs you down a linear path, you're free to explore whatever you want. You can go off in whatever direction you please, even if that's not what the game intends, which is what I did as a kid. Like, I went to some of the mid-game and late-game areas pretty much at the start of the game, when you're supposed to go somewhere else entirely. Yeah, just every time I play that game, it takes me back to the first time I went through it, and Star Fox Adventures is kind of special to me. It has this weird place in my heart because it's one of the very first games I bought for myself, and back then I didn't really get games very regularly, so every time I got one I'd just become obsessed with it. Like, for that week, month, however long it would take to play it, my life just revolved around that game, and I'd go through phases of being obsessed with games like this, whether it was Star Fox Adventures, Punch-Out, whatever. So the fact that it just takes me back to those childhood memories is just something else that contributes towards it being a comfort game for me. Now, I was talking earlier about ThornTail Hollow and how you always return to it, so because of that, it feels like you're home. And I think having a homely location, for lack of a better word, is a big part of what makes comfort games special, at least to me, because everyone has a different definition of a comfort game. This is just how I personally feel. But there's lots of other games that I find comforting, and one thing they have in common is that they have this special area that you always revisit. So some examples of this would be DK Isle in Donkey Kong 64. Again, the music, top tier, probably one of, if not my single favourite music track in all of gaming history. The DK Isle theme is so good. And probably the best part about that one is that there's just so many secrets to find, so many hidden golden bananas and whatnot, whatever that game had. It had way too many collectibles, but DK Isle was one of the best parts of it. Because I remember as a kid, sometimes I'd just fire up DK64, I wouldn't even go into any of the main worlds, and I'd just walk around DK Isle, and sometimes, very occasionally, I'd find a golden banana that I just never found before, and that was always like a huge whoa surprise feeling. I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but yeah, that sense of discovery just makes DK Isle special to me. Then you've got places like Windfall Island in Wind Waker. In that game, Windfall Island is like the hub of side quests, and you always go back there, there's always something new to do, and it changes around you as the game progresses. Similarly, there's Skyloft in Skyward Sword as well, because I remember specifically, every time you'd do a dungeon or complete an objective in the... what's that? It's not the underworld, it's the ground, whatever the ground is called in Skyward Sword, Faron Elden Lanayru. Whenever you'd come back from there, you'd always return to Skyloft, and you could go to the bazaar, you could upgrade your weapons, and as you progress through the game, more and more different side quests would open up, and it helped it to really feel like a living, breathing, fleshed out world, community almost, because you'd have all these school students and they'd have kind of realistic interactions during some of the side quests. I've just thought of another area that feels like home, and that would be Burramuji HQ from Ty the Tasmanian Tiger 2. This game I've only played recently, so I wouldn't consider it a comfort game as such, but I do find Burramuji HQ to be comforting. One issue I always had with the first Ty the Tasmanian Tiger is that the hub world felt kind of empty and uninspired, but in the sequel, they really fleshed it out. There's NPCs everywhere to talk to, there's collectibles to find, it is jam-packed, and because of the fact that you always start the game from that point, you're going to be seeing it on a regular basis. But luckily, like with Kakariko Village, like with Skyloft, it feels like a community that you get to be part of. I'm sure there's a lot of other examples of these home-like locations, especially in RPGs. I haven't played too many RPGs myself, but I'm sure there's a ton of places like this that you always come back to, the ones that change as the game progresses. So thank you for listening to this first installment of the Loading Zone podcast. I really hope you've enjoyed it. If you have and you want to see more of this kind of thing, let me know. It's just a way that I can talk about my feelings towards specific topics and get them off my chest. And luckily it doesn't require as much editing as most of my other videos, which take a lot of time to make. If you happen to also be a content creator and you want to star in one of these and you want to just chat about games, chat about whatever you want, let me know and we can sort something out over Discord. I'd love to have you guys on. But until then, I will see you guys in the next video.